This is Beautiful Church, a podcast where we hear about how God is putting hope and courage into his church in a time when it feels like everything else is falling apart. Welcome to Beautiful Church Podcast. I'm your host, Zack, Hensley, here with my co-host, Sarah McNulty.
Hello.
So what's going on in your world, Sarah?
Well, we're doing the mom thing.
Yeah?
And we're doing the prayer thing.
Yeah?
And
Prayer thing, mom thing.
Prayer thing, mom thing. That's what we're doing. We are praying that we mom well and then apologize when we don't.
So in other words, you don't really have much to say.
Nothing.
Yeah,
I
you got
never
nothing.
have. That is, no one has ever said that about me.
Right.
So I'll take that. That is not typically the testimony of my life.
We were talking earlier and you were like, okay, I don't want to talk too much. I was like, Sarah, this is a podcast. I literally have you on this show.
Because you know I talk a lot.
Because I know you talk a lot. Because we need you to talk.
Okay. It's a talk show.
Yeah, it's a talk show. Like if you don't talk, then it's just silence. It's bad. Nobody wants to hear that. We could also test that out right now and make sure that everybody stops listening. They're like, oh my gosh, it's silent.
It's quiet.
In fact, they get so offended that it's so quiet that they don't even just stop listening. Like the phone they're listening to it on, they just throw it away. They're like,
they never listen to podcasts
I
again.
don't want to listen to a podcast. I don't even want this phone anymore.
No,
I'm throwing it all. It's all done.
Yes, I'm going to bed. I'm going to start a new day.
Just funks at the bottom of the thing, and they go and buy a new phone that doesn't have podcasts on it.
But praise God, I talk a lot.
Oh, there we go. So they don't have to throw their phone away. So keep your phone and keep listening to podcasts because they're awesome.
Yeah.
And this one is a pretty good one too. And I'm really excited about who we're talking to today.
Yeah, Bobby.
Yeah. My buddy, Bobby Gourley, he pastors in Alabama. I was just going to say the wrong name of the city, and it's escaping me right now, but he's in
Alabama.
Alabama. He's in Alabama.
I wish I could save you on that one.
He's a tremendous guy. I've only met him in person probably twice. But we talk on the phone and on Zoom.
You sound very close.
And on Zoom all the time. He's just an amazing guy with a tremendous testimony.
And see, that's the thing that sticks out that I love re-listening to this interview, because we will hear how the Holy Spirit takes seriously decisions of 6-year-olds, 12-year-olds. He doesn't forget those things. Like, he is not unjust to forget your labor of love or your dedication to those little yeses that you make. Yeah. He is faithful to keep us. And that has been, I have talked about this interview several times of the impact that you can have on a 6-year-old, on a 9-year-old, on a 13-year-old. Yeah. And you would never guess where people come from, because the Lord uses us as a trophy for his mercy.
Yeah.
And
his church chapel is beautiful, and it's worthy to be talked about in terms of the theme of this podcast and hearing about what God is doing. But he himself, to me, is a sign and wonder of something that God is doing and has done and is going to continue to do. I think Bobby's impact on his community and in the lives of so many in I was hoping the name of the city would come to me, and it's not coming to me. But in Alabama, the impact that they're having on those communities there is just tremendous. So you're going to be blessed to hear this. So sit back, get a cup of coffee. I mean, my gosh, coffee is so good.
It is.
Get a cup of coffee and listen to this. It's going to be really good.
Pastors and coffee.
Pastor Bobby Gourley. Nope, the name of the city didn't come back. In Alabama.
You were hoping.
Chapel Church. I was hoping it would pop up, but it didn't. All right, let's check this out. We're here with Bobby Gourley. He pastors a church called Chapel in Huntsville, Alabama. And do you guys have just one location or two?
We just have one. We have a campus in Haiti. That's an outreach mission thing. And we're in Florence, so we're about 45 minutes to an hour west of Huntsville.
Okay, see, this whole time I've told people, my friend in Huntsville, Alabama. I don't know why.
It's all the same. And small towns, you just pick the closest city.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. So Florence, Alabama, and you guys have a campus in Haiti, as you said. You also have a dream center, correct?
Yes, correct.
And what is a dream center for those that don't know?
Man, it is outreach on steroids. Yeah. So it's it's modeled after the LA Dream Center.
Okay.
With Tommy Barnett and Matthew Barnett, those guys. Theirs is 24/7. They do a lot of Skid Row. Ours is generated ministry towards generational poverty. It's kind of one of our main focal points. Broken families, education. So Alabama is one of the poorest states in the nation. And within that, we're one of the poorest areas in the state. And so everything does that. So it started as a food bank years ago, and we generated it, or given a new generation as a dream center to do certain things that are different. So instead of just a regular food bank, we meet with every single client. There's about 1,200 families that come through a month. We meet with them. We encourage them. We share the gospel with them if they'll let us. We pray for them, and we give them a voucher, and they actually shop in the same location, shop in a mini grocery store for their food items. So we're adding value to them, providing for their own family. And then there's some back end stuff where if they do certain things, they get more stuff. So there's some life skills training to move them out of poverty. And then there's an after school program my wife started called Dream Center Academy, which has just been incredible. She pretty much designed it from the ground up. And so we take at-risk fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, I believe it is now. We have their same curriculum from their school. They're all Title I students, or the worst of the worst students. We take them, we have connected with the local university, and we get interns from their education department and their social work department. And so 3 days a week, each one of these students has their own education major student college, reteaching them their curriculum.
Wow.
And they have a social work intern who's actually walking them through behavioral life skills, that kind of thing. We've watched kids go from D's and F's to making the AB honor roll for the first time ever.
That's awesome.
And we found kids that couldn't read, like kids that they could answer every single question in a science workbook or whatever it was, and then fail the test.
Wow.
And so kind of find out what these interns realized it's because they couldn't read the questions on the test.
Wow.
When they talk to mom and dad can't read. And so in the school system is not there to teach an individual student, they're to teach a classroom. And so when you break it down at individual level, it's been really cool.
That's really cool.
Dream Center Academy Christmas. So we provide Christmas for all those kids that go through Dream Center Academy. And then we have a thing we sponsor, kind of the worst neighborhood in town statistically, with crime and poverty, that kind of thing. We do quarterly events there to share the gospel and kind of build value. So it's been cool.
So I want you to share a little bit about your story as well, because I was looking on your website, bobbygourley.com, which he has a website, bobbygourley.com. You can go check that out. You also have a book called Tactics, which I have in my library. Yeah, believe it or not, it's in there. It made it on a shelf.
Right next to Tozer and C.S. Lewis.
Right. Yeah. But so I was looking at your website, and you kind of told your story, just how you got saved, how you gave your life to Jesus, and I'd love to hear for you to tell that story here. Man,
I didn't grow up in church at all. Like my dad and mom were, they'll say, sex, drugs, and rock and roll of the 70s. Most families somewhere have a praying grandparent somewhere. I didn't even have that.
Wow.
And so our life, everything in my life revolved around partying. And so my parents were. It's a pretty abusive situation. My mom is still kind of out there with drugs and alcohol. She's in a season right now where she's got a rehab, and she's about to be 60 years old or whatever. So that was kind of how life was. Drugs were everywhere. We'd go to parties. My parents would lock us in a bedroom, and they'd do all the partying stuff. It was as far as cocaine and crack cocaine and that kind of thing in the 80s. And so that's kind of our life. There was a moment when I was 6 years old that we went to some Baptist basketball outreach in town. Yeah. And I was playing basketball, and I remember I got called over to the side, and my dad was with this missionary named John Schindler. John had done missions in Africa forever, just really godly, evangelistic type guy.
Yeah.
And he shared the gospel with my dad. My dad accepted Christ, shared it with me. I accepted Christ. We got baptized that next Sunday in the old Southern baptistry with the stream in the background of the baptismal and all that stuff. But we never went back to church. So we weren't even Easter, Christmas type people.
Oh, wow.
And through that, everything nothing really changed. I think my dad had a moment, but not a change. And so we're the kids that neighbors would pick us up and take us to VBS because they felt sorry for us and that kind of thing. And so I remember in high school, I went to youth ministry at that same Baptist church because a buddy of mine was like, man, there's girls everywhere. Right. So there's only two things important in teenage Bobby. Two things are important: basketball and girls. Those are only two things. They had both. So I went, and my dad had just gotten remarried, I think. And so everything was kind of up in the air. I'd raised myself for about 2 years, and my dad was single. So basically 12 to 15 years old. was just me living, getting myself everywhere, raising myself. And but at youth ministry, there was something I found that I'd never seen before. And the youth pastor was actually a woman. She was a mom of one of the students because the previous youth pastor had like a moral failure or something like that.
Yeah.
But I'd found unconditional love in an environment of acceptance that I wasn't used to. And I think it was important that it was coming from a woman with issues with my mom. Cause, I hadn't lived with my mom in years, and it was a really bad situation. And through that, man, I remember just a lot of things that's happened. I just remember I'd be laid down at what they call the altar in a Baptist church, just in worship. But nobody else did that kind of thing. For me, it was just an overflow of just like this brokenness.
Yeah.
But all these little rich, middle class Baptist kids, or dads are deacons and pastors, and my dad, he's the pot dealer in town. That kind of thing. They didn't understand what they had. But through that, I felt the call to ministry. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that I felt called to lead people. I thought that meant a basketball coach, but I saw that kind of parallel in church world. And I was walking through the same youth pastor's house, going to her son's room. She stopped me. She said, "Hey, has God called you to ministry yet?" And I was like, "Well, what's that mean?" And she explained it to me, and that's what I've been feeling. I said, "Well, who told you?" She said, "God did."
Wow.
Right. So you got a prophetic woman pastor in a Southern Baptist church.
That's amazing.
And so she kind of walked me through that. There was really no support from the church because I didn't fit the mold per se. I mean, this is mid-90s. I'm thugged out. I mean, the whole nine. Like, I'd already been arrested 3 times, so it's not like I'm the guy they want in church.
Right.
And so my senior year, I had a year where I didn't do anything. I was clean, like I was following Jesus, all that. I mean, carry my Bible to school. And then they fired the youth pastor, who was a woman, because she was a woman.
Wow.
Right. So I remember the pastor came in and told us, I've read parts of the Bible. I'm just a punk kid.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling me, "Hey, like, women aren't supposed to be in ministry. That's why we have to make this change. We got a guy who can do it." And I said, "Well, bro, like, it was fine while you benefited from it. But now that it doesn't benefit you, now there's a doctrine."
Yeah.
And then I had questions at that time on, the questions all teenagers ask, if God created us, who created God? If God's such a good God, why do bad things happen?
Yeah.
If God is a loving God, how come since I'm born in the South, there's a chance for me to get saved, but some kid in Iran, there's none? And here was their answer: "There's just certain questions you shouldn't ask."
I hate that.
So, like, at that time, now I'm kind of distant. And so I still hang around with the same people, and I just went back all in. So everything I did before was like 10 times worse now because I'm 17.
Yeah.
Get arrested again for a drive-by shooting at 17 years old. So now I'm literally doing community service hours at the same church that I just it was wild. And so
that's awesome.
It was just a crazy ride. And so I graduated high school. I got accepted to Cincinnati Tech University to go to be an electrical engineer, but nobody in my family had ever done any college. And so we show up, I got my roommate, and the first day I get kicked out because I hadn't paid and I'd never done the FAFSA. So nobody in my family knew FAFSA. Right. I didn't know FAFSA. So it was kind of this marker in time where I was already living wild. I just went completely farther. So, I mean, I'm selling drugs, I'm working, I'm doing all this stuff. And one day a cop showed up. He didn't do anything. He just tried to intimidate me. And my grandfather had been sick. And I was like, man, I can't have my grandfather seeing me on the news.
Yeah.
And so I signed up for the Air Force. That was my solution to kind of get a fresh start. And ran off to the Air Force. I'm considering myself an atheist at this time. And I thought I was getting a fresh start. It didn't take a month. I got arrested as soon as I got out of boot camp again. Wow. And so learned through the Air Force, just diversity of people, kind of found who I was, and I didn't like that person.
Yeah.
And I'd studied pretty much every religion. There was twice I went to a church in 4 years I was in the Air Force. Once was in Brownsville or in Pensacola. Yeah. I didn't go to Brownsville, went to a church there. Not a single person talked to me.
Wow.
Went to a charismatic church in Baltimore when I lived there. Not a single person spoke to me. And so that just kind of reiterated all the issues I had. I studied Judaism, Baha'i, Islam, Buddhism, And if I had to choose, I would have probably said I'm a pseudo Buddhist. Probably is what I would have told people.
It's the easiest one.
Yeah.
It was the easy one. And it made the most sense. And so I met my wife at that time. She had a pretty rough home life. She went to a charismatic private school. Had some great youth pastors, just mentored her. She was in the Air Force trying to get away from the family. I corrupted her as much as I possibly could. And then she got pregnant. We were living out of the Air Force, living in Ohio. She was starting to go to church. I still had nothing to do with church. I was just working, living life. I was okay with where I was at. And I went to work one night. When I went to work, it was a little factory, and I'll never forget it. I walked into work and I started hearing the word messianic prophecy. I never, in all the things I'd read, I never really seen anything with messianic. I never heard the term before. I mean, all night long for 8-hour shift, messianic prophecy, messianic prophecy, messianic prophecy. And then I see a vision of me preaching in the only church I'd really ever been in, which is that same church that youth pastor was at. And I was like, man, this is freaking crazy. Like, I don't believe in God. Why would I be thinking about preaching? Yeah. And like, what's this term mean? And like for 8 hours, like literally about to go insane. And so I drive home at second shift, get home 1 o'clock in the morning. And so we're living with Toy, my wife's parents at the time. And they had a basement with a little office in it. And there was a computer with a 56K dial-up mode.
That's so awesome.
You get the whole horror movie sound.
It's 5 minutes to log in.
Yeah. And the only thing I Googled, I think I did like an AOL search or something like that. But and I searched the word messianic prophecy. I didn't even know if it was a real word.
Yeah.
And I saw the 300 plus prophecies of Jesus fulfilling all the prophecies of the Old Testament.
Wow.
I saw all the fulfillments. And I just had this broken moment. I remember just laying on that carpet, just like, man, I'd met him. Like I'd met Jesus in that Baptist church. And I turned away from him and I went on but he was still choosing me and pursuing me and chasing after me. And I said, hey, this moment's enough. Like this is all you give me is enough.
Wow.
And I went upstairs. The sun was coming up. I wake Toya up and I'm like, hey, I need to tell you something. I was like, I've been wrong about Jesus. I wasn't like the complete jerk where I'm trying to persecute Christians, but I was pretty open, like, you're not going to convert me,
right?
Type thing. I'm not stupid. I just don't believe in God. But I told her, I said, hey, I've been wrong about Jesus.
Wow.
And I said, and I went through it, and she just started weeping. And she said that night, her and that youth pastor, who I consider my spiritual mom or my mother figure in life, were praying for me that entire night.
Wow.
This Toy is like, I'm done with this. I don't want to raise my daughter in this type of environment. I want my daughter following him in his leadership. And they prayed for me. So the same night they were praying for me is the night the Holy Spirit decided to reveal Jesus to me.
Wow.
And I tell people that's the power of prayer. Like I think when Paul was in prison and broke out of prison, and he goes, he shows up to a prayer meeting. I believe they were praying for Paul.
Right. Yeah.
At the same moment his chains were broken off. And for me, I joke, I'm like, hey, I didn't choose my way into the kingdom. My wife prayed me in, so she could probably pray me out. So I got to be real careful with how I live.
That's awesome. I love that.
I'm just thinking back to you 6 years old at church. It's like the Holy Spirit was the deposit, like you received the Holy Spirit, and He kept you. Like to him who's able to keep you from stumbling and present you faultless before him.
Yeah.
He kept you, and the Holy Spirit lived in you, lives in you. And it's like, goodness, he is so patient, so long suffering, so tender, so kind to walk with you that whole time.
Yeah. And I'll explain like a seed. Like I believe the seed of the gospel is planted deep down within. And like every season, somebody's trying to put dirt over it, whether it was me, whether it was my family, whether it was just life. And sometimes it just takes some of the winds of the storms of life to knock some of that dust off so you can see that little bud starting to poke through. But I do believe and that in the American church, we do want instantaneous results.
Yeah.
And very rarely do I believe it's the gospel an instantaneous result.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing testimony. And there's some significance I'd love to tease out too, just even in messianic prophecies. Like that's so specific for Jesus to say that to you, for the Holy Spirit to say that. That's really cool. We're going to take a quick break.
It is cool.
Come right back.
I wanted evidence.
Oh, we got a lag. No, go for it. No, I want to hear what you had to say.
No, I was going to say, because one of my arguments against Christians was there was no empirical evidence rebuff that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
No.
Like
Yeah.
it's 300 plus. And I think it was Dr. Stoner. He said the only way, and they only used, I think, 10 prophecies. And it was, what was the probability of one person fulfilling 10 of these messianic prophecies?
Yeah.
And the numbers, like, I think it was a 1 followed by 25 zeros or something. It's a crazy number. But the way he illustrates it, he said, if you take a silver dollar or take silver dollars and you put them all across the state of Texas, all across the state, that number of probability would cover the state of Texas from coast to coast, border to border, 3 feet deep.
Wow.
If you painted one of those silver dollars red and stirred it all up, it took a blind man and let him pick one, that would be the same probability.
And that's only with 10.
So, like, you can't argue that. That's only with 10. So there's like no way to argue that.
Right. That's incredible. I love that. Every year, like when Christmas comes around, I always think of the star in the sky. Like it was so obvious, even to like the Persians, just the wise men that came, that they traveled all the way across the Middle East to come because they were like, hey, that guy Daniel left this book behind.
Right.
And he said there would be a star. There it is. We should go find out this guy because maybe he can help us take down Rome. You know what I mean? Like there were so many prophecies fulfilled. It's just unreal. When you actually look at it, you're like, how could you not believe this? It's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back with Pastor Bobby. I want to hear about chapel and everything that's happening out there in Florence, Alabama.
So we are here in Kansas City.
Doing a live read.
A live read.
Live
though I'm not
ad.
reading anything.
Yeah, it's just like a live. Actually, this one I think we were thinking is like a live feel.
Oh, that's good.
Because we're not getting paid.
No.
We just feel like we want to share this.
I want you to know this because in Kansas City, since 1999, there has been a live worship team and people praying in a room 24/7 nonstop to pray, to intercede, to ask the Lord for things, but also to just adore him because he is worthy of 24/7 adoration.
And so many cool things have come from it, but it's really the whole purpose of it is because he's worthy, because he's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they can watch at ihopkc.org. You can watch
prayer room.
/prayer room, but they can watch on our YouTube channel, IHOP's YouTube channel.
Yep.
We lead, you're a singer in the prayer room.
Yep.
And I lead prayer meetings. Thursdays at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. You can tune in on those things that we just mentioned.
Come and pray with us.
Come pray with us. We're praying for the local church. So tell us about your church. What's happening? The big kind of cool testimonies, like what has been chapel, after you went through the hard part and everybody goes through that hard part. Now that God is really starting to really develop you guys, what is that starting to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with context, like, so that first year we lost 150, 200 people, but it never showed up in our numbers. Like that, the end of that next year, end of 2015, we had, I think it was 200 salvations and 150 baptisms.
Wow. In
a church of 400. So it was all incredible. New people. Yeah, unless you're the pastor, because then you have a bunch of new people. You have no idea who they are, who you can trust. They're undiscipled. Yeah, it's. But from there, it's like we discovered who we were.
Yeah.
And that's when I started looking for, a tribe to run with type thing, and because this church was proudly independent and non-denom.
Right.
And I was like, that's kind of where we're at. We need some life flowing in us, and we need to be part of something bigger. And so looked at a couple of different things, ended up with Radiant, which helped us really move forward. One of the things that I had a problem with was I was always prophetic. We just never had that term coming in AG world. AG's tongues, and interpretation, prophecies kind of off to the side. But I'd always had a prophetic bent, not knowing that's what it was. Well, when all this stuff happened, I kind of pushed that away and kind of rejected all of the prophetic. And I went to Every Nation. I don't know if you know about Every Nation, but Every Nation Church is based out in the Philippines, and now it's in Nashville. Great group of guys. I showed up to a minister's meeting, didn't know anybody. And they said, hey, in the morning, so-and-so is going to do prophetic ministry. And so I told one of the leaders, said, hey, bro, I'm gone. Like, I'm not dealing with this crap. And long story short, he's like, hey, we don't do it like that. We use accountability. Somebody gives a word, we record it on our phones. Here's how and it was a really safe place. I got a word that morning. I got it recorded. Just about me. So no one there knew me. Like, I'm one person I talked to on the phone. No one else knows me or anything going on. And this was when my wife had been sick. She was in a wheelchair. This guy gives us prophecy. He said, brother, as soon as you walked in last night, God showed me about you. He said, one, I know right now it feels like you're in a tornado because you're in a Wizard of Oz prophecy. He said, but as quickly as the storm started, it's going to stop and the house is going to fall on the wicked witch of the West. He said, and your wife, she's going to get out of that wheelchair. He's like, the enemy picked the wrong woman. He's went through all this stuff, and all of that came true. Like the storm seemed like it just stopped in 2016.
Wow.
I got a part of Radiant, saw prophetic presbytery for the first time. We've done 2. We'll do another one this year. And so we've been able to embrace the true word and spirit expression, where we preach deep theology. I'm going to preach the Apostles' Creed for the whole first 6 months of the year next year to kind of refound the church on good doctrine. But then we have expressions of prophetic words on Sunday mornings and, prayer room and all that stuff. And so it really helped us find out who we were. And so what God has been doing is we're a very rare expression of what it means to be a Word and Spirit church here, because there's never been one. And so we have people that come from the Reformed world, the Baptist world, the Church of Christ world, the Methodist world, that come here that are hungry for the things of the Spirit. But then we have people that come from the charismatic world who are hungry for the things of the Word. And we just tell people this pendulum swings. Some seasons we feel like a Word church, some seasons we feel like a charismatic church. And we've seen God do some really beautiful, beautiful things with that. We've seen healings. There's a couple from Puerto Rico. They came after the Hurricane Maria, I think it was. Super great couple, man. And she had some shoulder stuff, like bone spurs. It was all tore up. She didn't have insurance. She couldn't get it fixed. We prayed for her. Goes back. It's all gone. And so we have a side-by-side photo of this shoulder that is ate up with just white calcium deposits everywhere, and the other one is completely clear.
Wow.
And so that just does so much for people who think the things of the Spirit are going away with. We've seen just being diverse. We're about 30% African American, and here every church is white or black. There is no diverse churches, and so people really walk in, they don't think it's real. Right. And it's an interesting dynamic, and just the different generations that are here, the different nationalities. There's Nigerian and Kenyan and Korean and Jamaican and Haitian, Chinese, Honduran, Nicaraguan, like just all these expressions. And so we communicate, we value that, but we communicate that, hey, this is about gathering around the gospel and the presence of Jesus. Yeah. And what can happen when you don't gather around denomination or tradition or politics. But if Jesus is the centerpiece of the table, if he's the centerpiece, you don't have time to look at the differences of the people at the table. And so that's been cool. So we've seen influence in the city with that. So the black pastors come to us, we're looked at as kind of the covering or the flagship for the black church in town. Yeah. And the white churches come to us to ask how to handle not political issues, but racial issues and that kind of thing. And so it's been really neat. It was hard. We actually talked last night. There's a Confederate monument in our city. It's at the courthouse. I don't really get involved in most of that stuff. We're on the front end of civil rights and racial equality stuff, but the monument's been a hot item for a couple of years. Yeah. And I don't have a problem with it as much as it's at the courthouse. Right. And we have the documents when it was placed there. It was placed there to intimidate African-American families. So I was at a pastoral luncheon the other day, and the first Presbyterian pastor, who they're extremely liberal, they're affirming the whole nine, they wrote up a statement against the statue. So I brought to our elders last night, said, what do y'all think? Should we do something with them? And they all said no. They said, we do this every Sunday. We make a statement every Sunday about being here and about who we are, of what we stand for and what we stand against. We don't need to write a statement on a piece of paper for political purposes. We already get enough hate for being a diverse church as it is. Let's just stay in our lane type thing. So that's cool. And then I don't know if you know who Mark Rutland is, used to be over Oral Roberts University. I was with him in a training thing, and he made a statement. He said, don't try to be the biggest church in your city. Try to be the most influential church in the city. Yeah. And it shocked me. Our executive pastor was there. She's like, there's a couple other churches in town that it kind of gets competitive. She's like, that's why he's competitive with you.
Wow.
that we're the most influential church in the town.
Right.
You're the pastor of the town.
Yeah.
But he's the biggest.
Yeah.
And we've seen that just in connecting with other churches and pastors and just what God is doing. It's been really cool.
Now, how did you what do you feel like was, I mean, they're so diverse. You got the Word, you got the Spirit, the culture of the church seems so different. How did you get there? Like, what do you think was the catalyst?
There were seeds of it. So they wanted to be diverse before I got here, but their idea of diverse was not diverse. And I used to call it, there's a move now, maybe over, but where predominantly white churches wanted to have people of color in the congregations to feel better about themselves. They kind of had that a little bit. And I asked the founding pastor one day, he said, we try to get the African-American churches to come to our stuff, but they just won't come. And I said, well, do you go to their stuff? And he said, well, no. I was like, okay, well, now we know kind of where we're at. So one of our worship leaders is an African-American lady I'm really close with. And I just asked Melissa, I said, anytime you and your sisters go sing somewhere, let me know. And so every time they went and had a gospel singing, I'd be in a small little black church in the country, or I'd be at every single one of them. Only white guy walking in. And
you're tall too.
And at first, and I stand out a lot. And so at first it was kind of like, what's he doing here? And then they got to know me. And me and Melissa were just talking a couple months ago. She said, you were the first white pastor to cross over.
Wow.
Said for generations, it was the white pastors wanted the black pastors to cross over. She's like, you crossed over. And she's like, you are the pastor of all the black churches in town. And so it was stuff like that we're on the front end. Like, we're very proactive. When I first got here, Ferguson happened. So we just hit that head on. And then we stay on the front side of things. So we're not, and we tell people that, hey, we are diverse on purpose, because diversity shows that there's a greater unity than race.
Right.
And so that's been a big deal. It's hard.
Yeah. During the George Floyd thing, during the pandemic, you and I talked a ton offline, just, on the phone, mostly like, dude, what is happening right now? And what are we going to do with our churches? And you had this great analogy. I think it was the Sadducees, or help me out.
Oh,
with,
yeah.
You had this great analogy of how to handle it as a church. Since we're on that topic, share that a little bit.
Yeah, it was just be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees.
That's what it was. Yes.
That the Pharisees were the conservatives of the day. The Sadducees were the liberals of the day. The Sadducees are more the higher education elitist, but liberal. The Pharisees were more the fundamentalist. And Jesus said, beware of both, because both of these ruin the whole lot.
Yeah.
And so we just kept communicating that over and over again, that, hey, you can have your beliefs. You could be conservative or liberal, whatever it is. Just make sure those beliefs don't ruin the loaf.
Yeah.
And so, which in this day and age it's pretty difficult.
It is. What's like one big testimony that you've had that you've seen God move in a way that just kind of baffled you and your wife, where you're praying for something, you're praying for a family? Give us some of those testimonies. I just want to hear some of those.
One of the first ones, it wasn't anything we were praying for. Into that 2014, when I first got here, a guy, he'd already left the church. We had a Hispanic campus at that time. He went with them. You wouldn't know anything. He walked in. He's like, he stutters. He's like, hey, I'd like to see y'all do more with like media and worship music. He slid a check across the table. Well, I don't know what anybody gives. I don't pay. We have that in our culture. I don't know who gives what. You don't care.
Yeah.
But I took the check up front. I looked at it just to make sure it was made out to the church and not to the outreach at the time. It was a $300,000 check. Right?
Wow.
I've never seen anything like. I grew up in a trailer park, man. I ain't never seen anything like. And I take that in, and the elders, the founding pastor, is still there, and they were like, "Oh man, we could do this, this, this." I was like, "No, I think we have God's attention." And so to me, that was more important than the money.
Yeah.
And so for that next 2015, which is so hard, we never had to make financial decisions. We never had to make, what if so-and-so leaves, or what if this happens? It was like, no, God has got us.
Yeah.
And so that was a precursor miracle. Since then, we've seen, man, there's so many stories. There's a couple, he grew up really rough, kind of like I did, was on drugs. He was married. Him and his wife were coming here. She was cheating on him. She left him. They had 2 young kids. Long story short, he started dating another girl, that he was still married. There was issues. When you're in poverty, it's harder to get legal stuff done. And most of us know that. But and so they were coming to church. And I said, hey, man, when y'all get married? I was like, you keep playing like you're living together. He's like, man, he said, I'm trying. He's like, I can't get this divorce final. In the meantime, they've had 2 kids together in this new relationship. And so no one likes those conversations. I was like, hey, dude, let's do this the right way. And the day his divorce went final, he got married the next day. And then one of their sons was born blind. And so people in their family, some of their family goes to this very fundamentalist Pentecostal church. They were telling the baby was blind because it was born in sin, right? Oh. And so they're coming here, they get baptized. So he baptized him, then he baptizes his new wife.
Yeah.
And we began praying. One Sunday, they were sitting behind me. I said, Martin, is Koa here? He said, yes. I said, go get him. And so we brought him down front, and the whole church prayed for this 6-month-old baby that was blind. Just prayed for him. And I think it was a bigger statement to them because they kind of been outcasted for the marriage situation, all that stuff. About 3 months later, he texts me. He's like, hey, bro, like, you're not going to believe this. He's like, Koa's light receptivity, which is how they measure blindness in babies, started out like a 98. It's down to like a 60 something.
Wow.
And so to this day, I think he's at like a 20. So he's not blind anymore, but he's not seeing. Like that's been a big one for me.
Wow.
Just to see not just the blindness side, but the salvation side, the restoration of family side, to see him growing. It's been a really, really cool deal to see.
Yeah. Well, those are the testimonies. I think those are even more than even like the one-time moment miracle that happens. I feel like those, because that's what we are called to do as shepherds. We're called to help bring people to Jesus and watch the transformation happens when they meet him. Like it's we're friends of the bridegroom in a lot of ways. That's a term that we use around here, and it's a term in the Bible. John the Baptist was a friend of the bridegroom, and he has that famous phrase, he must increase so that I can decrease, because the goal is to bring everybody to him. And that's the reason why I love this podcast and I love what we're doing, this interview, hearing the story of you, hearing the story of your church is, I feel like so often right now, we are seeing so much just dysfunction in the church in America, if I could say it that way, because that's all that's talked about. Because everybody, it gets the clicks. The dysfunction gets the headlines. The dysfunction hits the algorithms. I was talking to this guy who's like a social media guy, and he's like, unfortunately, the best way to get popular on social media is to be very controversial. Right. And it's like, well, that's unfortunate, because I don't actually want to be like, I want to be controversial in good ways, but I don't want to be intentionally, provocational. And but so because we only hear about the negative things, what we don't hear is that like everyone assumes that most pastors are out there, making millions, flying private jets and whatever. And I talk to people often in my family and out there, like, well, I'm not a Christian because they're, all about this and the big and the money. They're not. What is that place? And it's like, every time that I would hear something like that, I think of guys like you, guys like where I was at, and pastors I know, and the majority of churches in America are doing what we do, which is suffering with Jesus, laboring to lead people to Jesus, and when they find him, their lives are transformed.
Right.
And,
it's
and
the
their
transformation.
Families are transformed.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the transformation and restoration. Like even the stories you were saying of 200 people get saved in the first, little bit of.
That's not a little thing.
That's not a little thing.
No.
Like that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Like that we don't often hear those types of testimonies. So you're saying this thing about this young man and his wife and his kids and even just your testimony. And I feel like there's just this theme of we're giving people Jesus. And we talked about that in another interview we did with another pastor of just like, I want to give people Jesus and see real transformation in their lives and see long-term friendship with Jesus, because that's what he's about. He's not about the quick changes. It's like, no. no, we're looking at eternity here. We want this thing to really be friendship and be intimacy with each other.
We're going to take a quick little break here in a second, but I want to. One of the things I love that you guys do is that you pray for other churches on Sunday morning. And you take time, 10 minutes. I mean, I've tuned in, especially when I was in California. I'd watch you guys because y'all are on the East Coast time, and I was on California time, so I'm getting up at 6 a.m. getting ready, and I'm like, oh, I'll just turn on Bobby's church. But you guys would be praying for other churches in the area. Tell us your heart behind that, and when you guys started doing that.
Yeah, so I come from megachurch world where that does not happen, and a couple years ago, I think Craig Rochelle said in the book, or maybe Confessions of a Pastor, but he said was on his way to his church one Sunday morning, passed the church. He's like, God bless that little church. And he started driving, and God was like, what if I bless that church more than you and your church?
Yeah.
And Craig was like, well, don't do that, is what he's saying. I said, so that tested my heart. and so in the city, like I wasn't accepted in the city to begin with.
Yeah. Just
because I was a new guy. No one moves here. Like everybody's from here.
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to start building some relationships with some other pastors. And I had this revelation that when God sees the church, he doesn't see the buildings, he sees the city.
Yeah.
Right. And so each church is a gate to the city.
Yeah.
And I realized that in order for the city to have renewal and revival, that every church needs to do their job.
Yeah.
And I think part of the church growth movement is we started thinking we could grow a church big enough to be the city or to be the church that God sees. And so it just shifted me. So during COVID, we gathered about 50 pastors, local pastors. We fed them dinner. We had a worship night. And it was this beautiful expression. I kind of shared that, hey, I need you to be successful. Like our city needs you to be successful and you to be successful and you to do your job and you do your job. Because if I do my job great and you don't do your job at all, the city still suffers.
Right.
Yeah. And in that, he used to be the executive pastor here before I got here. Older gentleman, he stood up. I said, why don't you just pray for these pastors? And Jimmy said, if you've been in this city less than 10 years, I want you to stand up. And man, half the room stood up. And he says, I want to tell y'all something. He said, in the early 90s, there was a move of God here. And he said, we messed it up. My generation messed it up because we got in the way trying to build our own platforms. And he said, I want to apologize to you guys. And he went one-to-one. He said, Caleb Chambers, who's a campus pastor at Church of the Highlands, he's like, I'm so grateful God brought you to Florence. We're better because you're here. He went through every one of them. And the older guys finally realized something broke. And the funny side of that is, as soon as we leave, my media guy who was running everything test positive for COVID. And this is like June of 20. So I just realized I gave everybody in the shoals COVID because all the pastors are in this room. But from there, I just started realizing I'm going to text these pastors every Sunday morning. And so I started texting them every Sunday morning, just a little devotional. I'm praying for you, believe in you, love you. And then on Sunday mornings, I started adding that to Sunday mornings. I needed our church to realize it's not just about us, it's about the kingdom. And so from there, man, we've had inroads like pastors, Baptist pastors. I was at staff meeting one day and a Baptist guy said, hey, weird question, but do you have any prayer cloths we could borrow? If not, where could I get one? And so it's this very like innocent, juvenile way of saying, I'm leaning into some things in the spirit, but I have no idea what I'm doing.
Right.
And so I responded. I was like, well, I was going to reply in tongues, but I thought that may be going too far. I'm like, bro, just get a cloth and pray over it. And I've had numerous Baptist guys who are just hungry for the things of the spirit. For Pastor Appreciation Month in our prayer meetings, we got thank you cards made with gift cards in them to a local butcher shop. And we had names of pastors in churches. I think there was 75 or 80. And we had everybody at prayer meeting take one, write a prayer in it for this pastor. And we sent that to those pastors. And so we've just seen God do so much in unity in those small little acts of kindness and just prayer that it's literally changing our city.
That's awesome.
That's incredible. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And I want you to share when we come back what you feel like God is saying to the church now. Just the big,
the big C church.
I think that's a phrase that's ours now. We keep saying it. So that's our thing, the big C church. But we're going to take a quick break and let's talk about what God is saying to the big C.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. The big C. Okay,
C. All right.
So here we are in Kansas City.
Yeah. Doing a live read.
Doing a live read, doing this, pitch.
We're just reading the script right now.
We are. Here's my script.
Here's an ad in the middle of this amazing conversation.
No, it's the overflow of my heart.
Yes.
And actually what I'm thinking about today and what I want to ask you about is you have some courses that you are coming out with.
Yes.
Specifically for local church pastors?
So both. So specifically for local church pastors, there's some coaching materials that are coming out in terms of how to build a praying church and build your church around prayer. So you can check that out, sign up for that, but also how to pray. Doing some different courses on the subject of prayer, the subject of devotional prayers, how to pray with your kids, how to pray as a family. And so those are all going to be available. It depends on when this ad airs. They will either be up right now or they will be available soon. But what you can do is you can go to zackhensley.com, Z-A-C-K. I'm not a Zach, I'm a Zack.
That's actually
Z-A-C-K
says
Z-A-C-K Hensley, zackhensley.com, and there will be a little box that you can drop your email in, or you'll be able to buy the courses if they're there, but you can drop your email and sign up, and it's going to be fun.
zackhensley.com.
zackhensley.com.
Visit it.
All right. Well, let's get back to this interview with probably some really awesome stuff happening.
Okay, so we are talking now. I forgot what we're talking about. You gave me you pointed at me and said start.
When she said one, I pointed at you like, oh, you do this part.
Yeah. We're talking about what do you feel like the Lord is saying to the Big C church?
I think he's saying a lot. I think you gave some numbers earlier just about kind of the leaving away, the great falling away. I think it's not even a falling away. I think it's a shaking that God is revealing better foundations.
Say that again. Worship, a shaking that's revealing better foundations.
Yes,
I think that's an important phrase.
Yeah, we're getting quite a few phrases from him that we need to just
I wanted
down.
to just isolate that one.
Yes. You're doing a good job bringing those out.
Yeah,
and so I think worship wise. So speaking of Frank Damasio, I don't know if this is during COVID or before COVID. He used these three phrases: Renaissance, Reformation, and Revival. And he kind of did a historical lesson on the church that coming out of the Black Plague is when the Renaissance came. It's when the Reformation came and when the revivals came. And so I've been floating around. Those are big buckets, but basically said that the culture didn't have a way to express the pain and agony of the Black Plague. And so what happened was the Renaissance was birthed out of this renewal of the creation of God to express things from out of the soul. And so I think there's going to be a renaissance of the arts and creativity. We were just talking about this in our executive team this week. But with that, I think worship is going to go back to being congregationally led worship. It sounds weird saying that out loud, where I think the 2000s to now that it moved to more platform led worship, where the worship leaders trying to draw the congregation into worship. Where in the 2000s, the congregation was trying to draw the worship leaders into worship. I think you will see some more of that. I think you're going to start seeing the arts and creativity grow out of COVID. I think that's going to lead to Reformation, which I believe is already happening. Reformation is just a restructuring of God's church back to the basics.
Yeah.
Where, like us going through the Apostles' Creed, I don't think people are deconstructing Christianity. I believe they're deconstructing American materialistic, nationalistic, consumer-based Christianity, right? Because deconstruction is not a movement except for in the West,
right?
And so I think there's things that I'm just as guilty of as anybody else, is that we created a modern faith that lacked ancient paths.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so trying to get back to ancient paths. So like the Apostles' Creed for us next year is a way to reiterate that, hey, this isn't a new thing. This isn't a new church. This is an old church that's using new technologies and that kind of thing. Whether that and ancient confessions, the Apostles' Creed, prepared some liturgies. I've done a deep dive in liturgy, and it started with a James K. Smith book. I don't know if you've read any James K. Smith.
Yes. Which one?
The
was
Desiring God book. I think it was Desiring God.
Yeah, that one. And
where it'll mess you up. Where he's just describing that you think it's a mega church, but it's a mall. And he starts talking about the liturgies of culture and all these things. And, liturgy is a way to reinforce beliefs and values and culture. And And, I come from church growth world. We've never had any liturgies. We do communion, once a month or once a quarter. And then I read a book, The Liturgy of Politics. Great book. And so then I started digging into, what is I didn't grow up in a church background. What are liturgies? So I talked to Tony Calabrese, Church of the City in Franklin. They're starting to use some liturgies there. John Tyson's starting to use some liturgy. Vintage Church in LA, Ash and Gurr, they're starting to use some liturgy. And so we just had an elders meeting last night. I said, I think we need something to reinforce theology and values consistently.
Yeah.
Because you can't preach on doctrine every Sunday. You can't preach on the same theology. But when you do communion every Sunday, you're reinforcing the theology of the Trinity, reinforcing the theology of the gospel. And so we're actually going to start some of that, because we did a R.C. Sproul Legionnaire survey. So they have a survey you can do for your church. And I was blown away by how, not culturally, they were all on par in transgender stuff, homosexuality, abortion. But there was questions. We had open theists that responded, they don't believe God knows the beginning from the end, that God learns and adapts to what's going on.
In your church?
There was some about in my church.
Wow.
There was some that responded that there was lots. I was just messed. There were some that were major. Some believe that science has disproved the Bible, and they're in my church. And I preach apologetics all the time. But the problem is you have so many people coming and going, so many new people. You have now people come once or twice a month.
Right.
And so there's so many holes in the church that we're evaluating how to do it. So liturgy is one way that we're going to do that. And that Reformation.
And one of the things, just for maybe somebody that doesn't know, I think even as soon as 200 years ago, the church, one of the reasons why they sang hymns was to reinforce every gathering, to reinforce what we believe. And the hymns were a way of not just worshiping, which I love that we've added the presence worship element, where we're talking to God and singing to Him like He's in the room. But the hymns and the liturgies, what you're talking about, those phrases and different acts that you would do to reinforce, to keep the cross ever before you, to keep to keep the message of the resurrection in front of us on a regular basis. Those things are so important. And oftentimes in churches today, if you're doing a marriage series and then you're doing a grace series, how to overcome anxiety series, that's a whole 4 months that have gone by, and you haven't mentioned the cross once, aside from remember the cross. Maybe it is one of the application points at the end. And so we're seeing this a lot, where there's a returning to kind of those ancient paths and those ancient things back into our regular practices,
without losing the power of a spirit-filled church at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think you may have been the one that gave me the definition that prayer is or worship is prayer to music.
Yeah.
So we use the terminology here that in word churches, worship is doctrine to music, but in charismatic churches, worship is prayer to music. Yeah. And we want both of those. And that now we're realizing we need both badly.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
And so I think that's kind of the Reformation's happened. Then I think revival is when, Jesus clears the stage of all of us and all our personalities, and He takes the stage.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're getting to. I think with COVID, with the increase of online stuff, I think maybe hurt that a little bit. But I think what you're seeing now is the personality driven is falling away, and Jesus is taking His church back. Yeah. This is the church growth model, I think, is done with. Even with Church of the Highlands, I've talked to my buddy there who's on staff as a campus pastor. He said, I think multi-site is dead.
Yeah.
He said, I think megachurch model is dead, and I'm in it. He said, because people are wanting a raw, authentic faith, an encounter that's not dictated by a TV screen.
Yeah.
So I believe that's what's going to happen. I believe citywide, God's going to do it through. It sounds bad. I believe revival is going to come. It's going to either come through the Black church or the Baptist church, not charismatic churches, and that's something I've been leaning into.
I want to hear why.
Yeah.
Just give me the highlights. Why do you think that?
I think the Baptist church has a better foundation of the gospel, and I think they have a better foundation of prayer.
Yeah.
Than charismatic churches do. I think when they pray, they're really seeking God's face. I think when in charismatic circles, we're seeking God's power.
Yeah.
And I think they'll get it first. The black churches, I think they have they've been subjected to so much oppression for so long.
Yeah.
That it's a valve waiting to be opened.
Yeah.
Type thing.
Yeah. That's interesting. I've never thought of it that way at all. I think that what you said about congregations worshiping being a thing, I think is so cool too, because I think one of the things that God is doing is everything for me, and a lot of conversations we've had with Lee Cummings and kind of our little friendship pastor circles have been centered around Acts 2:42. How do we get the church back to those three elements that are in that passage, which is community, together around a table,
community around the word, and prayer,
around fellowshipping around a table, and around prayer. And I think that those three elements coming back to where it's a regular, and there's something also I feel like God is doing where, and maybe I would love to hear what you think about this, where God is kind of removing the Sunday church expression and really bringing us more towards hey, this is our community. And our community is not a small group you sign up for, and our community is not a pastor that organizes fun events. Community is we're all in each other's lives, that we are a church that is in community, regularly gathering, regularly praying, regularly sharing the word with each other. And when you said that about singing and worshiping, that's kind of what I pictured, is that congregational worship where we're singing together as a group, gathering to sing together, gathering to pray together, gathering to fellowship together. The elements of that being so important, I feel like, to me, is one of the things that's going to get restored in the church at this time. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I would take it in two different directions. I think when you say the church has community, I think that's not restricted to one local church. I think
Correct.
You're saying,
when
I go out in town, other believers, I think, somebody asked during COVID, what about the mark of the beast? I'm like, don't be concerned with the mark of the beast. Be concerned with the mark of the lamb. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
let's go.
Jesus marks you, like, and so if you're marked by that, I think there's a greater recognition of who's who now.
Yeah.
And I think that builds a unity in the town or the city you're in, where it's going to go beyond just a Sunday morning church. Like you said, when you see somebody out in town, you can fellowship with believers that aren't part of your church.
Yeah.
And I think that's gonna be the strength. The other side of that, I think, is the discipleship piece, that we made a hard move towards discipleship groups, which are same gender. They're 3 to 5 people. The Bible is a curriculum. And the goal is for them to know how to hear God's voice through his word and through his spirit, and to obey his voice and apply it to their life so they can help 3 to 5 other people do the same thing. Like, it's a really simple concept. Yeah. And so we changed our, not our growth track, but our growth track style of thing, where the end of it is, we call it our upper room Christianity. So lower room Christianity for us is your normal Sunday morning church, and I think Will Mancini said it was built on people, place, personality, and programs. Wow. Right. So in the South, they're not going to get away from that. That's what they're built on.
Yeah.
But the upper room is where it's your strategic, unique way of making spirit-filled disciples. And so our upper room is our discipleship groups, where we want to see it. And this is our goal. Everybody knows this. We want 1,000 spirit-filled disciple makers by 2030. And what that means is there's 1,000 people that we've trained that to make disciples, that we walk them through freedom of the Spirit, gifts of the Spirit, infilling of the Holy Spirit, that they can go to their job, they can go to their school, they can go to their neighborhood, and they can disciple 3 to 5 people. And so when it changes the game, so you're not restricted by buildings, locations, COVID, programming, resources, that you literally take 1,000 spirit-filled discipleship seeds and planting them all over the area type thing. I believe that's kind of the next step.
Wow. That's cool. I love that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Hey, Bobby, it's been awesome talking to you. Thank you for doing this. You're a great friend, and love you a ton.
I'm just glad to be on here. I thought you were Corey Asbury for a little bit.
Come on now. Come on now.
I was like, man, Corey gained a little bit of weight.
That's awesome. Oh, I love that.
I think that's the funniest thing that ever been said on this podcast.
It's good to hang out and talk. I missed you a ton.
Yeah, man. Well, we'll catch up soon. And but thanks for tuning in, and
thank you so much for listening to the Beautiful Church podcast.
Beautiful Church podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Make sure you like us and follow us on Instagram and
like us on the thing. Not we don't care if they necessarily like us. We just want them to like the thing.
I mean, it would be nice if they liked us.
Yeah, okay. We'll take.
But hit the like button.
We'll take the affection.
Yeah. Subscribe.
But also,
do all those things that we do for podcasts.
Yeah.
And join us next time on Beautiful Church podcast.
Beautiful Church podcast.
On all the platforms.
All the platforms.
All of them.
We
don't miss one.